All right, moving on with part two of the Industrial Revolution lecture here. We're going to turn our attention to the effects felt by basically the labor sector, and they're having to adjust to the industrial era. From the start, when you're talking about the exponential growth in productivity, then things like time and time management are going to move to the forefront of employers' mindset. That is to say that that those running the facilities, those backing industrial businesses are going to want to maximize the amount of productivity in order to maximize profits, because now much more can be produced in a much uh, shorter amount of time. And so if you can manage time more precisely, then you can maximize productivity. In pre-industrial societies, workers usually worked irregular hours. This is especially the case in more agrarian societies, where you might have intense periods of labor, either sowing the crops or harvesting the crops, with kind of maintaining, obviously, or doing one's best to maintain the crops, so you get your maximum yield. But once the harvest was in, then workers would either kind of begin to refocus their attention to other tasks in preparation for making it through the winter months, or begin to take up other work to fill in the loss, or the loss of steady income, we'll say, that usually is experienced during in an agricultural industry. In factory life, you have conditions that necessitate greater regimentation of time. That there needs to be a greater sense of discipline that's put in place, so that workers are, working uh, in a way that is much more consistent. This meant that there needed to be standards for setting hours of work in place, um, to create shifts of labor in order to, again, maximize the machines, their output, and as a result, again, maximize profits. Workers therefore needed to conform to the machine's needs and management's needs for maximum output. That the worker is basically losing agency over how the individual worker himself or herself approaches meeting the needs, the labor needs, that might be established either, like I said, in agricultural industries, or in the cottage industry that I mentioned earlier. That you might have 2 weeks to get a contract to meet the obligations of a contract, but it was up to the individual to go to divvy up their day as far as how they were going to fulfill that obligation. So here in factory life, it is much more regimented. For many, as you might expect, this was not an easy transition. Workers who were necessarily poorly disciplined now found themselves having to, again, conform to these very rote and structured standards. Those individuals may have suffered from things like tardiness to work, or drunkenness, showing up to work drunk or incapacitated, And so as a result, the workplace needed to exact punishments. This included things like fines or dismissal, which really, in the case of dismissal, could lead to economic ruin, not only for the workers, but also for their families as well, if they were the principal breadwinner. So there's a direct, loss of income. It didn't help matters that with the effects that industrialization had, that you often had large pools of labor available, so that it was much easier to replace laborers, because industrialization is putting people in certain industries out of work because the work is becoming automated and mechanized, but also because of those two factors, because of mechanization, uh, the workers themselves don't are often considered non-skilled. That you're essentially maintaining the machines in order to make sure that there are no catastrophic failures, or if something, if the mechanized loom has produced the spun as much cotton as necessary, then you need to replace the spool in order to create a new um, spool of yarn, or you need to rethread the machine because it ran out of the cotton that it was spinning. All these different factors. But these jobs, once you learn how to do them, then it becomes pretty rote, uh, non-skilled. So that type of labor is much easier to replace. Children were also employed early on in the Industrial Revolution. One, because the labor demands were such that they needed all hands essentially in the workplace, but also children had the unique aspect and ability due to their size and their small their ability basically to get into small spaces, but also to because of the size of appendages that they could reach into machines to unjam a machine or what have you. In some cases, there was some catastrophic accidents, loss of limbs, death on the job. Um, so we'll be addressing some of the kind of the issues that arise in the workplace and the need for workplace safety um, in the after our next exam, and as we move into the 19th century. So, and you could also say that if some of this sounds parallel to what we've experienced in the here and now in the 21st century, the kind of need to the emphasis, I guess, being placed on, or de-emphasis being placed on uh, office work. Whether people can work from home or whether they need to be in a centralized facility, um, like an office building. There some of these issues, some of these kind of uh, parallels are beginning to reemerge here, in the reverse once again. As people argue about, or wish to continue to work from home because they enjoy a greater sense of autonomy. They enjoy a greater sense of self, you know, empowerment as far as pace of work is concerned. The work-life balance, probably that many of you, um, you know, have either experienced directly or can certainly relate to through anecdotes of others. Nonetheless, industrialization, it wasn't long before industrialization and the Industrial Revolution spread beyond the shores of the British Isles themselves. What's interesting, and Europe, continental Europe, was the first place to experience, to next experience this Industrial Revolution. It's important to understand that there were certain hurdles to industrializing elsewhere in Europe, again talking about the continent, the mainland, uh, for one, there was a more conservative mindset that many business owners, many bankers, many people in the ranks of the powers that be were more adverse to risk. And as a result, this hurt capital investment and opportunities for funding industrialization and projects supporting it. There was a overwhelming kind of preoccupation with maintaining the status quo. Things are going well, they're going well enough. Let's just stick with what we know, essentially. There were also anti competitive practices, which were in place because they benefited established wealth. Again, kind of reinforcing the status quo mentality. Also, you're talking about a particular regions of Europe, places like pre-revolutionary France. Russia is another good example. In some cases, the Germanic states, Prussia being kind of foremost among them, were places that were more autocratic in nature and in political order. This is going to help inhibit industrialized kind of growth, prevent it from taking place. For these reasons, it's not really until after the French Revolution, and the French Revolution was a cataclysm in itself. Again, one of the benefits to Britain is that it was a stable, country. It had a stable political system and economics, and so on and so forth. Well, when you have the effects of the French Revolution not only being felt within France, but also during the following years and decades, once Napoleon Bonaparte gets on the scene, you have Europe as a whole beginning to feel the effects of prolonged periods of war, calamity, instability, and so as France in particular and the rest of Europe grapple with the fallout from the French Revolution and from Napoleon, this means that this is going to prohibit the Industrial Revolution from really ramping up on the continent. When we get to talking about Napoleon's institution of the continental system, where he tries to boycott Britain, it is boycotting Britain just as Britain itself begins to really reap the benefits of the Industrial Revolution, which helps insulate it from any type of negative effects from Napoleon's continental system. Where they basically cut off all trade with Britain. All countries under or subservient to Napoleon, um, it was designed essentially to try and isolate and deprive Britain of what it needed, starve it in many cases. But the thing is that Britain is so far out ahead of the curve when it comes to economics, economic development, and industrialization, that the continental system under Napoleon doesn't really have any create any dire consequences for Britain. We'll get more into that when we talk about the Napoleonic era. So it's not really until Napoleon's final demise in 1815 and the years following that event that the rest of Europe, continental Europe, begins to feel the effects and begins to pursue a course of industrialization. In some cases, the mainland looked to copy Britain and the British model. Britain instituted policies to try and prevent this in many cases. For example, until 1825, British artisans could not leave the country, and until 1842, important machines and machine parts could not be exported from Britain, especially those related to the textile industry specifically. These are so you see this convergence between industrial technology and national security or national interest, right? So that the use, the rise, you might say, of things like industrial espionage. Um, in contemporary context, you might think about the pirating of goods, between, where predominantly, I guess it was back in the 90s, early 21st century, where U.S. technology was being pirated by Chinese businesses, and they were kind of rolling out these cheaper knockoff types of technologies or products. That kind of adversarial kind of relationship or antagonistic type of behavior in business really finds its some of its earliest modern parallels here in the Industrial Revolution. And so as a result, it's not long before Britain begins to say, okay, well, we're going to regulate it can move freely within the country, but we're going to, really crack down on how how technology is moved overseas, or how, who's allowed to go where and when and for what purpose. Nonetheless, despite all of that, technology did spread gradually. France, Belgium, the Germanic states all begin to industrialize, and this leads to a further cascading effect, all to the benefit of innovation. There's a growth of technological schools so that people receive the proper training and the latest mechanical methods. There are also political developments that are going to differ as well, so that you get alternative forms of industrialization. That industrialization is the end everyone wants to achieve, but the means by which they do that it becomes unique or kind of tailored depending on the country, and then the needs of their particular economies. For England, as we saw earlier, industrialization grew really kind of independently of government. That government was not really prohibiting industrialization, but it was rather laissez-faire, and operating along the lines of laissez-faire principles as far as how industrialization was to proceed. Okay, on the continent, government played a much greater role. Government subsidized the cost of providing technical educations. Government awarded grants to investors and foreign entrepreneurs to entice them to come over and set up businesses on the mainland. Government invested in building infrastructure, so that the private sector didn't need to take funds away from its own or out of its own coffers in order to build the roads necessary, as was the case in some some examples in Europe. Government was going to take care of that, and everybody can benefit from that increased connectivity. So roads, canals, railroads, all these things were public use. Government created protective tariffs as well. A tariff again is this tax that's placed on imported goods. On imported goods, basically coming from foreign countries. This is done in order to raise the prices of those foreign-made goods, so that it would encourage domestic citizens to buy domestic goods. So this helps support local industry and industry within the country itself. Revenue generated from these tariffs could, if once the tariff was paid, could spur additional public investment and industrialization and infrastructure projects. And also, it helped elevate, because you're putting a tax before the goods coming into the country make it to market. You're putting this tariff, this tax on them, which raises the price. This meant that it helped keep cheaper made, in some cases, cheaper made British goods from flooding the market in other non-English economies. So again, the government here is playing a more is having a more hands-on approach to industrialization. Now, whether you have industrialization through the private sector or with the aid of the public sector, I mean that's just a difference in, again, approach. What's interesting is that one reason why continental governments, and specifically we're talking about the Germanic states in particular here, is the reason why they would offer these kinds of incentives and kind of take a more hands-on approach is because that they're playing a game of catch-up and that they want to industrialize as quickly as possible and make up that lost ground, make up for that head start basically that the British had in many cases. So how do you do that? Well, you have government take over some of the liabilities of helping to encourage industrial growth. Frederick List, a German writer, emigrated to the U.S. and he became a U.S. citizen. He was born in 1789 and died in 1846. And he wrote one of his best works was titled National System, a National System of Political Economy. This was published in 1844, and it argued for this exact kind of structure, for the institution of protective tariffs as a key instrument in aggressive national industrialization efforts. That found particular traction in the United States, who by the 1840s was in the midst of focusing its attention increasingly on industrialization. That there was this kind of initial first round of industrial drive in the United States during that period of time. We'll talk more about that as we get closer to talking about the American Civil War after our next exam. Also, the European continent, we're back in Europe here, benefited from joint stock investment banks. Again, the kind of conservative nature of governments, of populations on the mainland of Europe that were more just hesitant to take on risk, formed these conglomerates, these joint stock companies or investment banks, actually. I should clarify that it's investment banks that we're talking about. Basically, this provided an institution where investors could put their money into the bank, and that money would be used to help fund numerous smaller investors to fund larger industrial projects. So, if you're would like to invest in an industrial venture, instead of just handing the money directly over to that inventor or business owner, you could put it into this institution, which provides a little more safeguards as far as insulating you from loss. You're losing the investment because you're investing into the bank, which is going to invest in other ventures, or a wider array of ventures. When you do that, if one venture goes bankrupt or doesn't make it, that's a loss, but you would be more likely to have other ventures succeed and therefore profit. And so therefore you're offsetting risk, you're minimizing it, because you're spreading it out over many different projects rather than just in one. So that type of structure, these joint stock investment banks, made it more attractive for investors to hand over the cash necessary to fuel these industrial endeavors. This is very similar in many respects if you think back to early in the semester, the Dutch East India Company, where people you buy shares in the company, and then they pay their shareholders back a portion of the profits that they make, as a result of their trade. Again, the key difference here is that you're not necessarily investing in trade profits, but you're investing in industrial profits. This differed from the kind of private factory-oriented investment in England. Now, typically in England, it was England's wealthy that funded their own projects, and they reaped the profits for themselves, or took out business loans from banks in order to fund their own individual projects. But geographically speaking, on the continent, places like Belgium, France, again the Germanic states in particular, they are looking to for these new kind of ideas of minimizing and mitigating risk. They're also going to approach industrialization, or put different industries at the forefront of industrial and investment, and also kind of endeavors. What I mean by that? Well, instead of going and investing in textile industries, instead, these countries like Belgium, France, and the Germanic states look to industrialize and start by doing so with the coal and iron ore industries, the mining industries. This is the natural resource that's most abundant in many cases for them to tap into, and it's where they're going to, obviously, as a result, profit from most immediately and to the greatest extent. So again, the approach you take, the industry you choose, as a governing or investing individual, may differ as far as what is available as far as natural resources are concerned. So just to kind of wrap things up, you have again Britain really serving as the source of the Industrial Revolution. Again, it was due to its political stability, its advanced banking system, the natural resources that were available, and again we're talking about the extraction and consumption of fossil fuels, which of course is going to have an environmental impact, which with climate change we're beginning to feel the effects of some 200 years on. That slow but steady progression begins here in the 1750s, and progressively since then. Britain is also benefiting from a good infrastructure. It has good relations between the public and private sectors of its society, between government and business, and it also has this global reach. It is, in many, if not all respects, a global empire. As far as the characteristics of the Industrial Revolution itself, it is focused on productivity, economic output, technological development, and also the knock-on effects that this is going to have, the social kind of consequences that this is going to have across all sectors of society. We talked about how, with regard to the workers, labor, how they're having to essentially reorient their lives and their lifestyle in order to meet the demands for you know new approaches to time and its considerations. As far as industrialization and the effects felt elsewhere, again, we just referred to how it was the European continent and the major powers there that are going to be next in line to feel the effects and reap the benefits of industrialization. Again, this largely happens soon after the Napoleonic era, which ended in 1815. It is more conservative in mindset, rooted in, again, maintaining the status quo. The workaround for this was, again, as just mentioned, the joint stock banks and ventures, which helped to share and mitigate risk. There was also, in order to make up for the time lost and the head start that Britain had, you have greater, more hands-on approach to government oversight and regulation through various means, one of which in particular was the adoption, the collection of protective tariffs, and how this, in many cases, in the European continent itself, we have heavy industry, mining, being the origin or benefiting most immediately from industrialization. So this is kind of gives you a sense of what we're talking about with the Industrial Revolution. Its defining characteristics, its consequences, and how it begins to spread rather rapidly in many cases. I mean, by within the first century, from 1750 to 1850, much of the Western world is Western Europe, North America is beginning to reap the benefits to some degree in and of an industrial, increasingly industrial economy. So that's where we're going to leave things for now. Next, we'll turn attention to the French Revolution, but even before that, we'll have a lecture on what is happening, the kind of political, cultural, social developments in India, China, and Southwest Asia, basically what we consider to be the Middle East and the Ottoman Empire today, or the Middle East today, the Ottoman Empire during up to about the year 1800. All right, talk to you then with that lecture. Take care.